assume all of these roads started off as horse tracks. They're basically, I think the shape of the route these roads go would be the way the horse followed the terrain, and gradually they would, just like you see sheep tracks, yes, you would end up having a path. And I think in the main, quite often, the road followed that path, and that's why it weaves, or the old road weaves around the way they did. It did.
Yes, I think Lord Leverhulme, who owned the island just at the end of the First World War and until he died in the 1925. That's right. He did have great schemes to improve the economy of Lewis, and one of the ways he did that was by building roads. So yeah, and some of the roads were built basically as unemployment relief schemes. I think there were various factors that led to the building of the first road in Pairc, and there had been some roads before then funded by the Congested Districts Board. Prior to 1900, say, sea transport was the form of transport, not just in Pairc, but many other parts of Lewis. Now it's true that although it didn't take long to get from Cremor to Stornoway by sea in good weather, that weather wasn't always good, so that was a big drawback, and that was one of the factors that led to the pressure for roads.
Around 1910, there was something like just only 100,000 vehicles on the road in Britain. You look at, say, 20 years after that, in Britain, you go from 100,000 vehicles to 1 million vehicles. And 8 years later, by 1938, 2 million vehicles. And so, the inevitable's happening, motorised transport is becoming more and more the norm rather than sea transport. And so there's a need to have good links between all of the settlements in Pairc.
I'm going to stop here because this is really the first bit where we see very obviously the old road, and you can see just how narrow it was, and vehicles had to pull into the side to be able to pass each other. Of course, there weren't so many vehicles on the road in these days. Now, I remember driving my father's bus down these roads, and some of these bridges you only had about 6 inches each side, to drive the bus through. You certainly had to have your wits about you all the time. It was, and of course these roads were not tarmacked until much later. So this road that joined, in fact the contract was from Gerrybard to Balawan, and while the contract was late, I think in 1919, the actual work, I don't think it started until 1922, and work was going on 1924 up to 1926. But this was the last part of the joining of Balawan. The roads were clay, and eventually they were tarred. Metal was just stone. It was metal was just the stone. Usually metal came from a crusher, so the bigger stones went into a crusher and got crushed down. Right. People went to Stornoway once a year. It was a big trip to decide to go to Stornoway. Some people would go more often than that, but my father's bus, coming home on a Friday night, had all the school children in it because we stayed in Stornoway all week, and also all the other sort of passengers. The bus would be absolutely full of people, and therefore it was very slow climbing these hills. They didn't have big powerful engines, and of course, because it was your father's bus, and you kind of wish it would go faster, you know. But anyway, what I do remember very much about this was somebody in the middle of the bus, and there was always a comedian somewhere, but someone in the bus shouting to my father, John, pull in, there's a horse and cart trying to get past, you know.
The coming of the road, it wasn't all beneficial. I think in the long run, there's no question that Pairc has benefited from the road. But when it first came, there were gainers and losers. The coming of the road, I think, was the death knell to most of the little local shops, because they couldn't compete with the larger merchants and shops in places like Stornoway.
But there's also a plus side, you know. Now, you know, we're 100 years on. People in Pairc, they've got access to job opportunities now, which weren't there. You know, people regularly commute to Stornoway, other areas. The community owns the land, and so it's in the driving seat now, and it can have a greater say, maybe the major say, in what happens to the area in the future.
There was a lot of cows in the village then, and one or two of us would take them from there, Ishbaliola at number 16, and myself, and we would walk out to the moor with the cows, and barefoot on the road. And the loveliest thing was to walk in the cow patch to soothe your feet, and then sit on the edge of the loch to warm, you know, to wash them away. But I've got so many fond memories of walking out that road and skipping between the sharp rocks, stones, they weren't rocks, sharp stones, because it wasn't smooth at all, you know.
And it was also a place where the young people could go and meet up with one another. You could meet youngsters from other villages there. There would be the occasional dance there in the summertime. So it was, there was more social life connected with the Graver to Calvus road than the other roads, particularly for getting peats and that kind of thing, because before that they would have to, the women would have to transport them on their backs with creels, or the men with sacks. And when the road opened, you could use wheelbarrows, and you could use public transport like lorries, and if there are any available.
With the others, I had a bus at one time, the Kennedy, and then Shawnee Cushty, Macmillan's in Lemreway, they had the bus, and the Leddy, Donny Morrison's father, they had a bus, and it would come round the villages. It would come round from Graver, Calbo, and round to Marriwick. And then, but it took about 3 hours to get to Stornoway, because there was a gate at each end of every village. So you had, the bus had to stop, open the gate, go through, close it again, and so on. So that's how, at school, we only got home once a term. And when we did get home, the bus had to leave at 6 o'clock. We had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to get to school for 9.
That was one of her greatest pleasures as children. Every car that came along, every van that came along, even the Royal Mail van, they always wanted a boy beside them to go and open the gate. So we would always be ready on the road. Yeah.
My mother would go to Stornoway maybe once or twice once a summer. And when she heard the bus coming through Calbus, because it was so, you know, cars that only the schoolmaster and Neil Rob in Calbost. Those were the only two cars. So you could hear the bus when it was coming through Calbost. You could hear it at our house. And my mother would start going, "Whoa," because of the smell of petrol. And we would go and pick bog myrtle down in the just down from the house there. And she would have a bunch of bog myrtle under her nose all the way to Stornoway to stop her being sick.
Well, my mother came from Calbost, and she married in 1931. So for the first 9 years of her marriage, she would be travelling over the rough moorland tracks between Calbost and Graver to see her parents there. And of course, conversely, they would be travelling to Graver that way. I would think it was probably about 1945, 46, when I was 9 or 10, that we were permitted to go on our own to make that journey. And we would go barefooted. The new road had just been built. It had just been finished in 1939. The side of the road, the borders, the edges, they were still soft and they were clean. There was no pebbles or stones on it. There was a quarry just before you come to the bridge. There's a quarry at the bridge now, but that was used for resurfacing the road when it was resurfaced in the 60s. The quarry that was used is now covered over with heather and moss, and they dug out the gravel and the road surfacing material they used with pick and shovel and crowbar. They didn't have any modern equipment for digging or for making chips or anything like that. So it was just a rough gravel road. They used to lay a fire on top of the rocks, and the rock would crack, and then they would push gelignite down there, and then they would set off. It would explode, and eventually they used that as part of the road surface as well. The foundations on the road surface. All the roads in South Lochs were just metal roads, as they called them. They were just gravel roads, and after a while, because of the heavy traffic, there'd be two tracks on either side of a grassy mound in the middle. So it was awkward for cyclists, but it was a great big improvement in what went before, and that is the trek over the moorland tracks.
celebrating that now.
Huh?
Oh, it's fine.